Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are going to take a look at Joker Folie à Deux, the sequel to Todd Phillips' Joker from 2019. And can I just say, people out there who are watching on YouTube land, some of y'all might think we don't do enough on this podcast. Might I remind you, we spent 2 hours of our lives on a Sunday watching this movie, so you don't have to. So if you want to show your appreciation and love for the sacrifices that we make on your behalf, why don't you consider commenting, and even subscribing? Because subscribing is the best way to let us know that, hey, we love what you guys do. Please suffer more on our behalf, so we don't have to.
So Luke, are you going to say that you didn't like this? Because I'm getting that vibe from the beginning here.
Well, it's not what I expected. Because because watching the first Joker film, you kind of get the feeling that Todd Phillips has taken the character in an entirely new direction, and it was bold and brilliant. So, so when they made the announcement for Joker Folie à Deux and they were introducing Harley Quinn, I thought, nah, this might be interesting. I might take a look at that. And we did do a trailer reaction for it earlier in the year, so so you can definitely check that out in the playlist. But I will say this: when we went on Sunday, I had no pretensions that it was going to be a movie that people were scrambling to see like they would with a Marvel movie or Oppenheimer, right? But when I got into the theater, because you came in like maybe 20 minutes later, I believe.
Oh, 2020. Okay, let's be real here, right? I didn't even miss anything. It was maybe 10 minutes, and we were still before the movie started.
Right. Well, in either case, when I got in, there were only two people there.
Yes.
Right. So,
yes.
Let's just say, the entire theater, we could have just gone anywhere and stretched out, and nobody would have made a fuss over it.
Absolutely.
But what was funny was that I think, what was it, Lee? Like an hour in,
yep.
Those two individuals just got up and walked away. And we looked at each other and we're like, oh, I guess that's 50% of the audience gone already.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. It was just the two of us sitting back there at that stage.
Now, to be fair, I did say, there would be no shame in us following suit, but you, being the movie pope and being a trooper, decided to stick it out, and that's why the audience loves you for it. It's because you don't take any shortcuts. You'll stick through all of this because you know that this is important. So why don't you go ahead and take us into your impressions and thoughts on the on the movie that was so brilliant that Todd Phillips decided, I'm never going to do another DC movie ever again.
I unfortunately could understand that, which is a shame, right? Because I think we don't want to get into like a discussion about the first Joker. But, I think it's important for, everyone to kind of know where we're at with that. And I would say the first one I thoroughly enjoyed, right? I think that was absolutely one of the better movies of that year. Easily within the top, I would say maybe 3 for that year. I know some people even might have that as being their best movie of the year. I mean, it was great. And I liked it because a lot of it was, we get to meet this character, Arthur Fleck, right? And it's kind of like this slow descent into madness. And that's how I kind of looked at it, because, it was a guy that obviously has, unfortunately, a lot going on with him, especially with his mental well-being. And you can kind of see how things start to kind of crumble around him. I think there's a lot of, I would say like social commentary on the lack of accessible mental health care. And I think that absolutely plays a part in this, because we kind of see him, kind of not taking his meds. The, doctor that he was working with ends up not having the resources available to continue meeting him. And then, kind of have everything that happens on the Maury show, right? At the end, that kind of culminates the ending of the film. I thought, but that's well done.
But that's the thing about the first Joker movie, because because with Arthur you could empathize, you could feel for what this guy was going through. So when he becomes the Joker, it's almost like, well, I don't agree with what he did, but I can understand why he does it. It's because
Yes.
there literally was nothing there for him to kind of help him out of his rut. But props to Todd Phillips too, because beforehand this was a guy who was known for making comedy movies. I know way
Yeah.
back in the day, you and we used to go and see the Hangover movies.
Yep.
And even back in high school, we watched Old School at a friend's house during a sleepover. So the fact that he decided to, take on the Joker, who's probably the most tragic and the most insane out of all villains in comic book lore, DC or Marvel, was a bit of a shocker. But props to him. He did a phenomenal job. He pulled it off, and he did something that took us all by surprise. It's kind of like it's sort of like when you look at Matthew McConaughey and you think, well, this guy can never do anything serious, right? And then Christopher Nolan puts him in a movie like Interstellar, and you're like, okay, this might be a huge game changer here. So how did you feel when they first announced that Todd Phillips was making a sequel to Joker Folie, Deux? Because you would think like the guy would just rest on his laurels and just be like, that's it. I'm done. I don't need to prove myself any further. I've done it.
Yeah. It made no sense to me. I felt like we got what we needed to out of the character. You told a concise story. And even by Todd Phillips's like own words, right? He said like it was really made as a standalone film. So I guess some interesting backstory that we can talk about is the fact that Joaquin Phoenix, he actually, I guess, had a dream where he kind of saw the character of Arthur Fleck there, performing on stage, telling jokes and singing, and this kind of gave him the idea of a musical sequel, right? And this is coming from Joaquin Phoenix, so
Right.
obviously, guy's got a lot of weird things going on up there, and I think that this is a good sign of that happening. Because obviously Todd Phillips signed off on doing this, but a lot of the origin, or at least the thoughts of how this movie would be presented, came from the interesting mind of Joaquin Phoenix.
But then that raises the question, like, how much influence did he have on Todd
Of
Phillips to
course.
where Todd Phillips said, you know what, that's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, and where that is, I don't think we'll ever truly know.
I don't think we want to know, Lee.
Yeah, that's probably true as well. So, but yeah, just kind of some interesting things that started with the origin of it. But yeah, like I don't know, like as we got into the movie, I think of the first one. I think how everything was just it was so dark, right? Like it felt like I could imagine that being Gotham and being kind of in this kind of world. Right. And it's so weird to me. Like the first one, it opened up with this like old fashioned, like animated cartoon short. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I don't know. I find that really off putting for the film. Right. I get that you're trying to do something a little bit quirky and you're trying to do something different. But to me, this just kind of causes a lot of tonal whiplash because it's just like you have this animated sequence that I just don't feel how it fits for the story. I guess you're trying to like convey kind of like, Arthur Fleck's character being kind of quote unquote crazy, right? And maybe this is just like, oh, this is really crazy. Like, we're having we're having this imagination with an animated short here at the beginning. But I don't know. It really like right off the bat, that kind of left a poor taste in my mouth for what I was about to see. What are your thoughts about it? Because it is a very unique opening that you don't really see a lot of.
No, I will say this. I mean, I enjoyed the animated sequence. I'm a huge fan of the old school Warner Brothers Looney Tunes cartoons, but at the same time, it's kind of a convoluted way of saying Arthur's going bananas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, you could have dropped the intro, and we still would have gotten the notion that he's not right in the head. I guess they just did it because they thought it would be funny, or they thought it was just a way to pay homage to Warner Brothers or whatever. But as much as I like that the animated sequence, it didn't add anything to the story. I think if they'd taken it out, it would have been a lot shorter. Yeah.
It was pretty much just a recap. Like, hey, cool. If you don't remember the first one, here's a weird animated Looney Tunes type opening just to get you caught
But
up.
I mean, if it's a recap, I think it does a pretty shitty job because I think the courtroom scene kind of summarizes it a whole lot better than that.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. I agree with you on that. So, yeah. So I guess we could talk about. I think the performances, right, are kind of one of the big things that we can kind of help discuss here. And really, I think it's Joaquin Phoenix reprising his role as Arthur Fleck and Lady Gaga playing Harley Quinn. So I'll kind of start off here with the Joker. And I think one of the things that bugged me the most with this is if you felt like there was an important story to kind of tell with the Joker character, I don't know what that was. Because to me, all this was almost a retread of the first movie. The first movie kind of, ends to me with Arthur Fleck kind of embracing this Joker character or kind of embracing the madness of everything that's going on and everything that he kind of created. Whereas in this one, it feels like they did that again, but they just kind of retell the story a little bit different. And then when you get to the courtroom sequence, I think he kind of comes to terms with it. But I just didn't like that because it feels like you reverted the Joker character back to how he started with the first one. And we just kind of see everything unravel a little bit the same as the first version. And it felt boring. What did you think of the Joker character in this one? Which, by the way, I will say, I do think Joaquin Phoenix still did a good job in it. I don't think it was nearly as good as the first one.
It was very subdued.
I still think it was sufficient for what we were trying to do. So, but yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you felt about Joker.
Well, no, I was gonna say it was very subdued this time around. But
yes,
but what I was gonna say was when Joker. I mean, for a movie that that's called Joker Folie, Deux, you'd think you'd see more of the Joker, but you rarely see the Joker's side come out. You only see him near the end of the movie when he's in the courtroom, because most of the time he's Arthur Fleck, and even then he has no idea of who he wants to be. But what really pissed me off was the fact that at the end he just says, "Yeah, there is no Joker. I'm just a mentally sick guy." I was just thinking, so is that the joke? So basically, the first movie that you made didn't mean anything. It was. It wasn't him taking on a new persona. It was just the fact that he's got some sort of clown fetish, and he just snapped and killed a guy on live TV and then just caused a riot.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt it cheapened what the first movie had accomplished. It kind of felt like what they were saying was, hey, that first movie that you really enjoyed, yeah, it really doesn't matter. None of it matters. It's just a big joke. So, and that's what really bothered me. It was the fact that, if you do a sequence, you want to build off on what the previous movie did. You don't trash it and say it didn't mean anything.
Agreed.
Because I mean, even if you're not a comic book fan, like most people really enjoyed watching the first Joker movie. So to do something like that is the equivalent of giving a middle finger and saying, well, I mean, fuck you guys, basically.
Yeah. It's an absolute slap in the face of the audience.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah. And now I'm sure Todd Phillips, sort of felt a bit cringe himself, because a part of me likes to think he kind of didn't want to go in that direction, but he was kind of being pushed into it by Joaquin Phoenix. But again, I don't think we'll really know what's going on here.
Well, like I said, the studio was kind of, I think, pushing it due to the success of the first one. So I think there's unfortunately probably greed played a very large role in how this turned out.
Yeah, as it always does. So
yes, unfortunately, as it always does. So, but yeah, so and I guess let's talk about Harley Quinn, right? And to me, this was kind of an odd depiction, right? And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that because, number one, Lady Gaga plays her, and I think we might have some different feelings about that. I personally did not have a ton of issues with her, but I think the main challenge is that she never really had a whole lot of actual, like, acting related scenes. A lot of her job was singing. And we'll get to that for sure. Like, I don't want to bury the lead here with the singing, but we'll get to that very briefly, very soon. But it just feels like a lot of that is where it was. So it just made the character uninteresting to me. I felt that she had maybe a little bit too much to do with the movie. She felt like she was kind of the one pulling the strings. And that's what really made it odd to me, right? It was a very odd choice because when we think about our understanding of the Joker, whether it's the comics, the animated series, we always think to we have the Joker, and he's always been kind of the one that he manipulates Harley Quinn because of the type of character that she is. I actually felt in this one that it was almost like a role reversal, right? Where it's Harley Quinn that's the one that's pulling the strings and making Joker the way he is, or Arthur Fleck the way he is. So I don't know. What do you think of Harley Quinn? And do you also feel like maybe the portrayal of her was just a little bit weird in this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on the role reversal where she's kind of trying to manipulate Arthur in this case, but she really didn't do much. Like when you have
it didn't take a lot of effort.
I mean, when you have an image of Harley Quinn, I mean, obviously you're going to think back to the animated series or Margot Robbie's portrayal in previous movies, where she's very much hands-on, shall we say. She's very much out there causing mayhem and chaos. Whereas here, I think the only chaotic thing she does was set fire to a bunch of papers when they're watching the movie. That's it. I mean, it's very subdued. It's not the Harley Quinn that we know and recognize.
Yes.
And furthermore, I kind of feel like Lady Gaga just spends, like you said, spends more of her time singing a bunch of public domain songs rather than do anything to advance the storyline, if there is a storyline to begin with.
Yes. Not to mention, let's not forget the intimate time that she spent with the Joker, which I think might be one of the most uncomfortable things I've had to watch in a while.
Which made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Because I mean, unless you're into clown sex, then this totally just makes you scratch your head and wonder what the hell am I looking at here.
Mm-hmm.
But I think but I thought Lady Gaga was a really, really odd choice because she's not really known for playing characters who require a lot of energy, a lot of physicality to them, right? And anybody who's familiar with the Harley Quinn movies from the Suicide Squad or Joker or Batman or whatever, she's very much the type of person who will break your nose or smack you in the head with a baseball bat and do all these flips and twirls and try to wind you up. Here she's just another face in the crowd, really. I mean, you'll notice that nobody else pays attention to her except for Arthur and maybe the guard. But nobody else just seems to notice who she is. And what's also strange is the fact that Arthur, keeps playing up to her, keeps saying and doing all these really rash things that kind of work against his interest. But the payoff isn't really satisfying at the end.
No, not at all. I mean, it feels like we know that Arthur has, unfortunately, this kind of very unhealthy idea about relationships, right? Not to get super psychological with this, but he obviously had a very weird relationship with his mother. And then, kind of had these weird fantasies about the neighbor, right? So he has this very uncomfortable idea about relationships. And I mean, it makes sense how Harley Quinn can easily manipulate someone like this because he never really probably has never had any type of legitimate relationship. But it just doesn't make it fun for the movie, especially when that's supposed to be our main character. Like the character, I mean, not necessarily care about, right? Like, I don't want to make it sound like that. I think there is a certain sense of you feel bad for them, but in this, it was just like seeing he felt pathetic, and it's just, to me, that's not what you want to have, especially for such an iconic character like the Joker, to just feel like, wow, this guy just kind of is lame. And I think that's the worst thing that you could do for a character like that.
But I mean, but that's my thing. I feel like if they had to do a Joker sequel, I mean, do you really need Harley Quinn in the equation? Because I mean, you could have done another Joker sequel if they had to, but I think they could have pulled it off and done a much better job than not have to do it the way that they did it. You know
Oh
what I
yeah,
mean?
sure. There was a lot of different directions they could have gone with. And once again, not to bring up this kind of like Joaquin Phoenix thing, but I know one of the things he did talk about was this idea of having like a female Joker to do like a duet with. So not like, once again, I don't know how much creative liberty he had, but I do know that that was something that came up, and how much that was pushed for it, who knows. But yeah, I agree. There was a ton of, I mean, I don't even really felt, obviously it didn't need a sequel to begin with. But I think that there definitely was a different story you could have told than the one that we got, for sure. So no, absolutely no arguments there. I think that there is definitely more that you could have done for that. And I guess now is a good time as any to talk about the singing, right?
Mhm.
We kind of hinted at it quite a bit. The singing's lame. There's just no way about it. And I'm not talking about necessarily the performances, right? Like, I definitely think Lady Gaga could sing. So I don't want to say anything against that. But you kind of brought it up. It's like these free domain songs that are like, old, antiquated. They're not very interesting. I don't know how many times we could hear, when the Saints come marching in and all this other stuff that came up. And it was uninteresting. And I will say there's not obviously a ton of musicals that come out nowadays, right? You got stuff like Hamilton, but it's very rare. But I just didn't really enjoy this. It was like kind of like a pseudo musical, right? Because really there was plenty of non-singing lines involved, but there was like enough of it that I was like, okay, I guess we could kind of call it a musical, and it just didn't really do anything. And I think more troubling is it didn't really move the story along. And I think that was its biggest challenge. Like, a lot of the times it felt like they were just singing. It was almost like they were just singing about their emotions. It was like, Arthur has obviously, a lot of like intimacy issues and everything like that. So I kind of looked at it like, okay, like he's singing his feelings because he doesn't really know how to say it. But with that being said, it's like you're singing about your feelings, and that's all we're really doing. And how much of that do we need to do to get the point across? Whereas some of the other singing parts felt like we're just singing for the sake of singing. So I have a whole lot of conflicted things with the singing, but overall, it just didn't work for me at all. I think it was an extremely poor choice to have all that singing in there, and it didn't have much of a purpose. I guess, what are your thoughts on the stupid singing that I'm sure everyone's talking about?
I mean, I'll say this: I'm not a fan of musicals. I'm sure you're not big into musicals yourself either.
Nope.
But if you're gonna do a musical, would it kill you to write some original material? Like, how many times can we hear that song? Come on, get happy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I mean, seriously, like Lady Gaga, is an accomplished songwriter. I'm sure she would have been more than happy to write something, original, if you asked her. But I feel like the whole process of making this movie, everybody was just dragging their feet, and they're like, well, we got to do it because they're throwing a bunch of money at us, so might as well do it. And I just get the feeling that everybody wasn't on, wasn't, running on firing on all cylinders when they were making this movie. You know what I mean?
Agreed.
Just cause,
Yeah.
just because everything from the storytelling, quote unquote, to the music, to to what happens at the end, it's just slapdash.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
little
phoned
bit.
in.
Yeah, it's kind of like season 8 of Game of Thrones, where they just decide we're just not going to give a shit. I mean, if we leave a Starbucks cup, on the judge's bench, I mean, it's there. The judge likes Starbucks. I just don't understand. I just don't understand. If they really were intent, or bent on doing a musical, why they couldn't just write some original material.
Agreed.
Why just go through the same 3 songs over and over again? I mean, they might as well have been singing "Row, Row, Row Your Boat." It would have done the same thing.
Totally half-assed it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like Lady Gaga could have just gotten up in the courtroom and started singing "Row, Row, Row Your Boat," or "The wheels on the bus go round and round," and we still would have gotten the same idea from what they were trying to convey, whatever that happened to be in the movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was just, it felt like a very ill-conceived attempt to do something with it. If that's truly the direction, I don't really understand what they were aiming for. But hey, there we go. Singing was not a huge thing for either one of us as we watched this. So, I guess just to give a little bit about what's happening in this whole sequence is ultimately all this is leading up to a trial, right? Where Arthur Fleck is going to be, on trial for the murders in the first film. And we eventually get to kind of that courtroom scene where you see how easily the Joker's manipulated, right? Because, Harley Quinn's like, Mary Ann, who's the lawyer, she's not really doing stuff for your best interest. We kind of see, kind of a brief cameo from characters in the first one, right? We saw the neighbor, right? She shows up again along with the short-statured individual.
Yeah, Gary Puddles.
Yes, that was in there as well. So we kind of see a little bit of that. And all in all, like the whole purpose of the trial is, it's like he starts to, I think, kind of get into the Joker mindset once again, right? So we see it start off where he's, acting a little bit subdued. And once again, we see kind of that transition like we saw in the first one, where we start to see him become more and more the Joker persona, mainly through makeup, right? Because I felt like, and you said it very well, he felt very subdued in this version, and I totally agree with that. It didn't feel like the Joker, even with the makeup on. It felt like a guy that was trying to play the Joker, which I guess you could argue is the point of it, because the Joker was never there. It was just, him acting poorly and kind of creating this persona. But to me, it just really muddied everything. And then kind of having that big conclusion at the end where he's like, I'm not the Joker. Like, I just did this and I'm just a person that just did bad things. I didn't like any of that. I thought that it totally just threw everything away that we saw in the first one. It just kind of takes out a lot of nuance for it. Now, is he like, is that something maybe someone that's a little bit not there? Is that something we would say? I don't know. There's a whole lot of things to kind of get out of that, but I just didn't like that whole sequence throughout the whole trial. So I don't know. What did you think of kind of the revelation where we go through this whole trial and we see the Joker just kind of admitting to everybody that the Joker's just a persona?
I'll go back to what I said earlier. It just basically just cheapened and invalidated the first movie.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, if there was a joke, that was it. Like, that was the big joke of the movie. If one were to believe, I'll tell you what really, really struck me was the fact that it didn't surprise me that he fired his lawyer, right?
No, not at all.
What I was expecting was for Arthur to go up to Harley and ask her to represent him, right?
Oh,
that's what I was expecting. So when he decided to take the stand and stuff, I'm like, okay, that was something I didn't really expect, because throughout the movie she's sort of laying a trail of breadcrumbs that, hey, she's slowly manipulating him, then she's going to take control over him. So what better way to sort of be the master of him than to represent him in a trial? But no, she doesn't do anything like that. And I thought, had they done that, had they made the move, it would have at least shown that she had, she'd finally mastered complete control of the Joker by literally having control over the matter of life or death over him, right? Yeah. Because what she says or does could determine whether Arthur walks away, free to a mental hospital, or if he's going to get the electric chair. But no, they don't do that. It's just oh no, I'm just going to represent myself, and then he makes that admission. It's like, okay, so apparently you don't give a fuck about anything. All right, so why should we give a fuck about things?
Yep. No, that's really interesting. I think that would have definitely maybe created a little bit more nuance with his craziness that I feel like is needed. Because it is just, to your point, right, a huge slap in the face, just to be very blunt with the whole situation.
Because that would have been, I wouldn't say a more satisfactory payoff, but it would have made the payoff a little bit more palatable had they done that.
Yes.
But but the way they went, I mean, again, to my point earlier, they had packed it in a long time ago, so everybody was just running on empty fumes at this point.
Yeah, totally agreed. So that's ultimately what ends up kind of happening is, he just kind of admits this. We have a huge bomb that goes off that kind of like, opens up a portion of the courtroom now because it blows up. I'm always stuck with this whole issue of like why he has as many fans as he does, right? Because when I think of like, some of these guys, I think of like characters that are super charismatic, and kind of like I can understand how people would be suckered into it. With this,
like
I don't get it.
Bundy, for instance, because I mean, Ted Bundy had a huge bevy of women wanting to sleep with him, even when he was behind bars. But here, I mean, here's someone who's very meek, who's very subdued, who really doesn't say much, and yet surprisingly, everybody is rooting for him.
Yeah, it's really weird, and I think that's something that really always takes me out of that story too. It's like I don't get why. It's one of those things where I feel like the legend kind of supersedes the actual person, which I mean does happen, but I mean there's just so little that we see of this character that would make me understand why people would be enthralled by what he is and what he's doing enough to do all this. Like it just feels so over the top and distracting. And then let's talk about the ending, right? The ending where like Arthur pretty much is there and he gets confronted by some random inmate and gets stabbed to death. Right? He gets stabbed to death, and then what also happens behind the scene, right? So this is all kind of happening, faded out, right? Because you can't really see; it's kind of obstructed a little bit. But you see Arthur just like kind of bleeding out there from some stomach wounds, and then you have the guy behind him who's like making cuts on his face.
The Glasgow grin. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we kind of see that happening. Granted, a lot of it's like obstructed, like you can't really see everything that's happening, but like you kind of get the feel for what's going on. And I don't know what the movie wanted us to get from this. It's like, are you trying to say that like the mantle of the Joker could be anybody? Or are you like saying like literally that the Joker that we're seeing now kind of be created is maybe the one that we see depicted in some of the other films? Like, is this like the Nolan? Is this the Heath Ledger Joker? Because we see him cutting up his face. Like, I don't know what they were going for. So I guess you're super cerebral with this type of stuff, Luca. How did you interpret the ending? Like, what did you get out of it?
I mean, the Joker's infamous for being very coy about his origins.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'll say this: I never thought Arthur Fleck would be the same Joker that Bruce Wayne, would confront later on in life as the Batman. I'm going to put it out right now. But at the same time, I mean, this movie has done so much to give the middle finger to the audience. By the time you get to the end, it's like, well, nobody really gives a shit, dude. Like, I mean, why should we care if you don't care about us? Now, what I will say though is, is that, and you mentioned this too, because it's funny that the guard, has him walk out of the hallway and then he just disappears, and then that shanking happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, did everybody just decide they had enough of Arthur Fleck? Because you remember earlier in the film, after he does that TV interview, the guards, they kind of like go to town on him.
Yeah.
And they, I think they give him a swirly in the toilet or something. and then they pull his pants down, and I'm assuming they did something to him, because he's very, very traumatized afterwards. So I kind of get the feeling that by this point, nobody in Arkham really, really cares about Arthur anymore, and they just want him out of the picture.
Yep.
So if something were to happen to him, well, we didn't see anything, so we can't really do much.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: that guy who stabbed Joker, was that the same guy that that Arthur was told to kiss earlier in the movie?
See, initially I thought so, but I don't believe it was him. I think it was totally somebody else.
Okay. I was wondering about that because we see that guy hanging out with Arthur in the prison yard on a few occasions. So
yes, correct. You do see more of him in there. And like I said, I do remember there was like a scene where he's jumping on the table for him. So we do see some manipulation there, but I'm under the impression that it was a totally random person that ends up doing it. Yeah, it just, I don't know. I didn't really like it. I didn't like kind of I just didn't really like what they wanted to do with the story, and the ending just felt like, gosh, out of all the things to do, it just felt so awkward how that ended up kind of finishing.
Do you know what it is? Do you know what it is, Lee? It's basically the film trying to say, oh, look at how clever we can be. We're going to throw out all these red herrings and try to mess with your head. Isn't that clever of us? And you're just basically sitting there like, no, dude, you're just full of hot air. You're just bullshitting people. This isn't clever. This is bait and switch.
Yeah, it absolutely feels like something where I think maybe at some stage there was some thought put into this, but I just feel like they didn't know what to do with the character. And to my point, right? I don't want to beat that dead horse, right? There just was nothing more that the character really needed to have happen. So to have it end just kind of how it was just I guess it was saying at the beginning he always felt like he was an unimportant person, and at the end he just died being an unimportant person too. It's just it is the way it is. But yeah, for beginning to end, I just really can't say anything super positive about this. I'm honestly struggling to say anything I really liked about it. I guess, and I'll just give my final grade now because I just feel like there's nothing really for me.
Is it? But is it even worth it though?
We have to. We have to grade stuff, right? We have to give it some form of a grade. I would give it a 1.2 out of 5. I didn't like it. I thought that there just wasn't a lot. I didn't understand the character of the Joker. I felt like they wanted him to be one thing and then they wanted to be something else. I didn't like the manipulation tactics. It just kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. The songs were boring and uninteresting. There just really wasn't a whole lot of positives. I guess I should say I think Joaquin Phoenix did okay as the Joker in the second time around, but it's hard to really say a whole lot of positive things about it when I feel like he ultimately really didn't show a lot of himself. So it's just I think anyone could have filled that role and would have been the wiser to it. So yeah, I didn't like it. It's such a shame that a super iconic character that I thought had a very interesting and engaging first movie just totally fell flat, and it totally failed with the sequel.
I'm just gonna give it a 0 out of 5.
Oh my gosh!
There's really nothing about this movie that I enjoy because it's basically a middle finger to everybody who loved the first Joker movie, and what happened in the court scene pretty much soured any goodwill that I had. Honestly, this will definitely change the way that I rewatch the first Joker movie now that I know that the joke is that there really is no Joker. I can definitely see why Todd Phillips has decided he's never going to touch DC ever again, not with a 10-foot pole, not even if James Gunn offered him billions and billions of dollars. It's a blessing and a curse, really, because it's so it's so difficult to try to make a good Joker movie, but when you pull it off, it's so tempting to get back into the game. And unfortunately, Todd Phillips kind of gave into temptation, and this is what happened. So, not to mention too, Joaquin Phoenix, he's been on a slew of movies that have been less than stellar.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm a bit shocked, I'm a bit disappointed. So yeah, that's my score. But go ahead and let us know down in the comments below what you think of Joker Folie à Deux. Did you? I can't even say this. Did you like it, or did you feel it was a huge pile of shit? And if you're enjoying the content that we're doing, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please subscribe. Show your love for us, because we did sacrifice 2 hours of our lives to see this interesting movie, and we stuck through it, for the full 2 hours, even after the other two people left. And if you're wondering why we didn't leave, also let us know down in the comments below, and his moviness will do his best to answer. But other than that, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.